Well, good morning. Good to see you all today. I want to invite you to open a Bible with me to Luke chapter 18. We're going to be spending time in Luke chapter 18 together today as we continue on in our fall series in Redlands as it is in heaven, just asking God for his kingdom to come to this earth, specifically here in our own city and all around the world. And we're also wondering, if he were to do that, what would it look like? What would we expect to see if God's kingdom were to break into your own life and here in Redlands? And this morning we have a really wonderful and interesting story that Jesus tells us about a widow and a judge. It says in verse 1, "And Jesus told his disciples a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, 'Give me justice against my adversary.' For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, 'Though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming.' And the Lord said, 'Hear what the unrighteous judge says, and will not God give justice to his elect, who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" I really love the plainness of this parable. Jesus tells his disciples a parable, and Luke wants you to know that he told them this parable. He's telling you then this parable in order that it would have a certain effect on you. So this story is being shared so that it would affect you in a certain way. And what is that way? It's that you would not lose heart. Jesus is telling a story this morning so that you would not throw in the towel, so that you would not lose heart, so that you would not give up, but instead you would go to God with your cares and pray to him. I wonder this morning, as you sit in your seat, as you walked into this building this morning, I wonder how many of you guys are losing heart right now. How many of you are in a place where you might say, yeah, I'm on the brink of that, or I'm in the midst of that? Anybody here this morning feel like throwing in the towel on something in life? Maybe it's your job. You want to throw in the towel on your job. Or maybe it's another relationship. It's something that's really painful in your family dynamic of some kind. And you're like, I'm had it. I'm done, right? I'm done trying. Or maybe it's your marriage, right? You're ready to throw in the towel on your marriage. Or maybe you just feel way over your head in parenting, whether it's little kids or it's teenagers or something, and you're like, man, these teenagers are doing things I never thought they would do, and I have no idea how to help them through this. Or maybe you are the teenager, right? And you're like so just done with how restrictive your parents feel to you, I could go on, but suffice to say, unless you're 4 years old, right? And if you're 4 years old, you're probably not here. You're probably over in kids ministry. Unless you're 4 years old, you most likely find yourself today wanting to throw in the towel on something. Like your job, your friend, your school, your address, maybe your church, maybe your marriage. And if you were so honest this morning, you might even say, I'm ready to throw in the towel on my faith. I think I'm done with God. Or maybe it's so bad that you have this sense, I'm ready to throw in the towel on life, right? I want you to know that God cares enough about where you are today. So he tells you a story so that you'd go to the feet of Jesus and cast your cares on him and not lose heart. And so, how will you persist in prayer? That's the first question we're going to ask. We're going to ask two questions. The first is, how will you persist in prayer? If Jesus tells this story so that it has an effect on you, that you would always pray and not lose heart, the first question is, how will you persist in prayer? The answer in our story is you got to know your need. You got to know that you are in need. You got to feel that need. All right, so we have two characters in this story. We have a judge and we have a widow. And the big thing that we need to know about them is that they are not equal people. Right? They are not equal people. Right? There's a huge imbalance between these two characters. The judge is at the very top of society, and the widow is at the very bottom of society. Right? The judge has all the power. She has absolutely no power. He has the status, the praise, the admiration, the wealth in society, and he has a means to do whatever he wants. He has power because people do what he wants, and they carry out the decisions that he makes. The widow is on the other end, right? She's a female, which in this society meant she had no influence. Right? She has no means to support her own self. Right? She's a widow, which means her life is marked by grief and loss. Right? She has an adversary, we learn. So she has an enemy, actually. She's got someone who potentially is coming after her to prey upon her in her weakness. Right? This happens even now today, that people will prey on widows or widowers in other societies and even in our own society. But in this instance, it could very well be somebody, which this would have been fairly common, someone who would want to come in and maybe force her out of her home and take it away from her. Whatever it is, we know that this woman is definitely in need. She is in need, and she needs the judge to use his power, to use the laws of the land to help her and to give her justice. But he's not that kind of judge. Verse 2, what do we see again? He doesn't fear God, and he doesn't care what other people think about him. So without those two guardrails in your life, you guys, you're just going to do whatever is in your best interest, right? Right, if you don't fear God, you don't care what he thinks about you, and you don't care what other people think about you, then you're just going to do whatever you want to do. So this guy, he just wants a quiet life, a comfortable life. He doesn't care about this widow situation. So this widow is going to be walked all over. And here's the problem, right? It's unless this person in authority can help her, because she is in desperate need, and that is highlighted by her persistence. So let's just pause here for a second, and we have to realize something. Jesus never chooses his characters randomly. He never chooses his characters randomly, never. He's never like, let's just say it's kind of like a judge and a widow, and he just like pulls it out of thin air, and kind of goes with it or something. That's not how Jesus tells his stories. He's very intentional about the characters that he chooses. And so think about it. The widow is someone that he wants us to relate to. He wants you to relate to this widow, right? He says, in effect, do you want to know something about prayer? Do you want to know something about not losing heart? Well, let me tell you a story about someone who's completely helpless, right? Someone with no power, someone who's completely dependent. See, Jesus is teaching us something about life in his kingdom. He's teaching us something about prayer, as it were. He's telling us that prayer is being in a place where you actually acknowledge and say, I need help. I can't fix this. God, unless you do something about this, nothing will be done. I am completely helpless. And so I imagine there are some of you in this room this morning that you hear that, and Jesus is like, hey, I want you to relate to this widow. And you're like, easy, that's me, right? I am the widow. I need God so desperately right now to sort out the situation in my life, or to sort out this relationship that I have with this family member or this loved one, or this person that I care about that doesn't know Jesus, and they just keep saying horrible things and running as far away from him as possible. What can I do about that? What about this illness, right, that I can't do anything about? What about my future that feels so blurry and so scary to me? Look at the world. I need God. If that's you, Jesus has built this parable around that exact sense that you have. Right? He gets you. He gets that. That's a really good thing. That's where you should be. That's what will help you and actually drive you to the feet of Jesus. You're in a good place to actually start praying if you feel that way. And furthermore, that's simply where you and I live, whether we want to come to grips with it or not. You know? I mean, see, some of you are here and you might actually think, man, I don't need God. And in some sense, you don't know why you're here. But I'm really glad you're here. And maybe you think, I don't need God in any way, shape, or form, but perhaps you wouldn't say you're a Christian and you don't think, I don't need God's help in any way like that. But I just wonder, at some point in your life, you felt helpless, right? I mean, at some point in your life, you probably felt helpless. Haven't you felt whether it was just some sadness that like suddenly came into your life or some grief of some kind? Or maybe you experienced this long uncertainty of an illness in your life. Or this place where you didn't know what the future held, or you didn't know how to get into this really difficult situation. I mean, haven't you, if you feel like you don't really need God, haven't you at one point felt helpless in your life? I mean, this at one point. And maybe you saw that moment and you go, that was just like a speed bump. You know, I had to slow down for it, but now I'm back in control. You know, I got everything the way that I need it. Right, but what if it was actually the other way around? What if it was the other way around? What if those are actually signs? What if those moments of helplessness are actually signals that you are helpless? And that the feeling that you have of not needing help is actually a facade. It's actually a facade that one day will be stripped away. I mean, just think about the things that you most treasure in your life or the things that you are most invested in. Think about your family, right? Think about your health. Think about your future. Aren't those the things that you feel the most helpless in? I mean, you might think this morning that Christianity, it's just for weak people, you know? And you'd be right. You would 100% be right. The irony is that's every human being, right? It's just that Christians are the ones who've actually come to embrace their weakness. That's what it means to be a Christian in so many ways. And if you're here this morning and you don't really feel your sense of need, you feel like you got a good handle on things, I totally get it. I hate feeling in need or letting other people think that I'm in need. Full disclosure, I hate that feeling. I run away from it. I don't want you to think that I have any needs. I'll give you a vulnerable, really dumb story. It happened to me this week. It's so vivid because of the story that I was studying all week, right? So this week, it was a wonderful week, all these wonderful festivities at Gateway Seminary. As one of our own church members, Adam Groza, was inaugurated as the next president. It was a very special week, I know, for the Groza family, for Holly and everybody, and we're celebrating that. But on Tuesday night, it was the 80th anniversary of Gateway Seminary, and so there was all these wonderful activities and like a Ferris wheel and so many food trucks. It was just so much fun. And I was an alumni of Gateway, so I went with my wife and a couple of my kids, and it was a great time. But we walk in, the whole event is free. And they go, here's some raffle tickets, right? We're going to do some raffle off some items here shortly. Just if your number's called, you get something. And I just went, whatever, okay, I'll take it, but I don't need it. And at some point in the festivities, we found ourselves around the area where they're auctioning off these items. And so I'm listening and paying attention. And Kristen Ferguson, who does a great job at the seminary, she's raffling off these items. And all the numbers she's saying, no one's coming up. And so I'm beginning to go like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for Kristen. Like, I hope somebody goes up there and gets a prize or whatever. And finally, they rattle off a number that's really close to my number. And my son, Gus, is standing next to me. He's like, Dad, isn't that what Mom has? Isn't that Mom's ticket? And I went over to Elizabeth and I was like, is that the ticket you have? And she goes, yes, certainly it is. And I grab the ticket and I go forward kind of sheepishly like, hey, sorry, this is, we have that number and this sort of thing. And they give me this really cool prize. It's like a remote control Volkswagen bus thing, I don't know, right? And I take this thing and I turn around and everyone is like, good job, Josh, and, kind of like hamming me up and stuff. But the whole time, I'll tell you what was going on in my heart. okay? I'm sitting there thinking, I feel so bad for Kristen, I wish I could help. I wish I could go over there and alleviate having to keep rattling off numbers, right? But then I go up there to get this bus thing, and what I'm concerned about is I don't want people to think I actually want this, because if you think I actually want this, you think I'm in need in some way. This is literally what's going on in my heart, you know? So in some sense, I want to be like, well, guys, I'm just doing this for Kristen, and my kids really want this thing. I don't really need this thing, you know? Does this make sense to you? Does this ever happen to you in any way, shape, or form? Am I just that unhealthy of a person that I'm like receiving this gift and I don't want it because I don't want you to think that I would be in need and need to receive anything that's free? Right? You might not have this problem. You might love raffles and free things. But this is like what's going on in my life, and it's so dumb. It just feels like a prison. You're like, what is wrong with me, you know? There is a sense of pride in us that we don't want to admit. We don't want to embrace our need. And that attitude of our heart is the very thing that is preventing us from going to God in prayer. Sustained prayer is difficult in our lives because we simply think, I need to get back to work. If I just sit here and talk to God, I'm wasting my time. I need to get back to work and make things happen. But Jesus is linking up here this not losing heart with praying constantly. And he's saying if you want to grow in your prayer life, you've got to come to grips with your need. You must feel your need. You must see your need. And this is so hard for us because we try as Americans to design our own lives in such a way that we would never feel like we are in need. I mean, some people in our culture have insurance for their insurance, right? We get fed the message all the time that we are in control of our lives and all we have to do is just grab the bull by the horns and you make whatever you want happen. But there are times where everything gets stripped away and things don't go to plan, and we, in those moments, remember, I am not God. I am his creature, his creation. I am made to be dependent. We are made to be sustained by someone else, just like a nursing baby is to their mother. See, prayer will be impossible for you if you don't know your need, but if all you know is your need, you will lose heart. So that leads to the second thing, and that is simply the question, well, how in the world will you not lose heart? How will you not lose heart? Well, you must know your God. Know your God. I love how Charles Spurgeon says, I have a great need for God, and I have a great God for my need. I have a great God for my need. I mean, what do we expect this widow to do? Right? Well, we expect her to just give up, don't we? Right? Just to let it go. It's not going to work out for you. There's no point. Even if this is a really messed up situation, there's no point. But she does not give up. And that's where this parable gets really interesting. I mean, look down again at verse 3. What happens? It says, there was a widow in that city who kept coming to the judge and saying, give me justice against my adversary. She did not give in. She just pestered him. Right? She pestered the judge. But he still wouldn't give her justice. So she surprised him, at the door of his car, on his way home from work. She walked over to him at the table at the restaurant when he's sitting there with his buddies and reminded him of what's going on in her life, right? She filled his inbox with emails and voicemail messages and things like that. She put up yard signs in his yard, and he still wouldn't help her. Right? She kept going back and going back and going back and going back until finally the judge was so worn out. Verse 4, for a while he refused, but afterwards he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. Beat me down. The word literally is like, give me a black eye. She just kept going nonstop. The judge never changed. His character never changed. he's still a horrible judge. But the widow has won because of her persistence. And she keeps going to him because she's running to the only person that she knows that has enough power to actually help her, even though he could not care less about her. So this parable, I think, can be easily misunderstood by us because it can cause us, if we aren't careful, to misunderstand who God is and what prayer is even in general. I mean, it can make us feel like prayer is like nagging God, right, to get him to care about us. And maybe you wonder if that is what it is saying, that you're just like, I guess I have to nag God, and if I nag him long enough, if I wear him down, he'll give me what I want. It's kind of like the what every parent seems to go through with their little kids, where the kid comes to you and says, hey, can I have this treat? And you go, no. And then they come back a little bit later, can I have this treat? No. And can I have this treat? Go ask your mom, right? Well, she said no, right? And you go, okay, no then. And they go, well, can I please have this treat? And you go, fine, you can have it, right? I want peace. I don't want you to keep asking me about this thing, It's not because I really wanted to give it, it's just that I want them to leave me alone. Right? Every parent kind of has this sort of thing. Is that what it is, though? Is that what prayer is? Well, that's not how this parable is working. I know prayer might feel that way, but that's not what's happening here. That's not what prayer is. Because the character of the person that you're praying to is so different. Right? Know the character of the God that you're actually praying to. And this is why Tozer's famous line that so many people cherish, they cherish it because it's so true. What did he say, A.W. Tozer? He said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Because our picture of God shapes what we think we're doing when we pray. So if your picture of God is that he's uninterested in you, if your picture of God is that he's annoyed by you, then prayer to you will feel like you're trying to hack the system. It's about being loud. It's about being obnoxious and getting into God's face until he finally goes, leave me alone. If God is impersonal, then prayer is this magic formula in your mind, right? Where you feel like you have to say the perfect words in the perfect order, at the perfect time, in the perfect number of times, and then just magically it unlocks an answer to that prayer. God has to listen to you then. So I just want to ask you, I think sometimes we're like, I don't do that, but let me just ask you a couple of assessment questions, okay? Let me ask you a few assessment questions to see, have you brought into your vision of God aspects of this? That he is basically, your vision of God is he's kind of like the unjust judge. Right? I mean, think about this. Do you repeat a request because you think the quality of a prayer is dependent upon the quantity of your words? Do you repeat a request over and over again because you think that God is ignorant and needs to be informed about your situation? Or if he's not ignorant, at least he's unconcerned, and therefore he needs to be persuaded to care about you? Do you repeat your prayers because you believe that God is unwilling to answer and you have to wear him down and somehow transform a hard-hearted God into a compassionate and loving one? Do you repeat a request because you think that God is going to be swayed in his decision if you put on an impressive show of zeal and piety, as if God can't see through the thin veil of what you're really doing? I think we have these wrong views about God and our relationship to him as it relates to prayer. It can kind of feel at times like a radio signal bouncing into space off of a satellite. You're kind of like saying these things out into space, just hoping that it gets picked up. Right? It's like you imagine those people in the movies who are like stranded on an island. They find a radio and they go, does anybody hear me? Right? And they're just like hoping maybe someone's listening on the other line and picks up. Like prayer can feel that way to us. But that's not what the Bible teaches. The psalmist says this. The psalmist in Psalm 116 says, I love the Lord because he has heard my voice. Because he inclined his ear to me, I will call on him as long as I live. Guys, when you pray, you're not bouncing words into space. The Bible shows you that when you pray, you whisper your words into the very ear of God. It's very different. This is who your God is, and this is what comes into view in verse 6. The Lord said, "Hear what the unrighteous judge says." Jesus says, "Will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them?" This is a parable of contrast. It's an argument of the lesser to the greater. If the unjust judge would do this, wouldn't God, the righteous judge, the one who promises to give justice, won't he do something about it? It's a lesser to greater argument. I've told you a lot about my dumb cat, Rosie, right? And the same would be true. If I spend untold amount of money on cat food, and I tell my wife all the time, like, this cat is so expensive, right? Like, we'd save so much money if we didn't have this cat. And so, but if I feed my cat Rosie, my kids could look at that and go, well, of course my dad is going to feed us. I'm not going to feed the cat and be like, sorry, there's nothing, I don't have any money left for you guys, right, to eat any dinner, you know? Well, of course, I mean, if we're going to feed a cat, right, you're going to get something, right? I mean, you're going to get something better, you know? That's a lesser to greater than argument, and that's what Jesus is saying. He's saying if a mean and selfish and uncaring judge would give justice because he's so worn down by the widow, even though she has nothing to blackmail him with or anything like that, then how much more would an infinitely compassionate and loving and powerful and caring God listen to you? If an unloving, good-for-nothing, unrighteous judge gives justice, how much more will the infinitely just God do what is right in your life? I mean, have you ever believed God could do something, but simultaneously you believed he wouldn't do something? Have you ever done that? Like, God could do that, but he's not going to do that. Maybe it's a sick child being healed. Maybe it's actually getting a new job. Maybe it is repairing a relationship. He could do that, but he's not going to do that. You fill in the blank, right? We often think this way because we think of God as so grand and so distant, rightfully so, and we see ourselves as so small and insignificant, so the thought goes, he doesn't care about me. Why would he? He has more important things to do. He has more important work going on. But that kind of thinking, while deceptively you're tricking yourself into thinking you have this great high view of God, it actually is a too small view of God. It's way too small of a view of God. Because look again at verse 7. What does it say? Will not God give justice to his elect? To his chosen ones? This is an adoption language. That's what this is. Jesus is wanting to correct us. And so if we were going to think that we somehow persuaded ourselves into the arms of God, right? Or that we wanted him, and he had to accept us because we sort of were told what the secret password is, and we entered it, and the name is Jesus, and he's like, all right, well, you get in, right? If you think that your relationship with God is this way, then sure, that thought that he actually cares about you, that's a really difficult thought if you think you persuaded your way into his arms. But if God actually said, I want you, then that fundamentally changes my relationship with God. God is so big that before the world began, the Bible teaches us that he thought of you. He thought of all his people. And he says, I'm going to have them as my own. And I'm going to order all the events of their lives so that they will ultimately encounter my love. And I'm going to ultimately demonstrate that love by sending my son Jesus to go into this world and to die for their sin, for all their pride, for all the times that they just thought, I don't need God. I'm going to send him into the world to die for them in their place to get the justice that they deserve. And we remember these moments of Jesus before he went to that cross, how he got down and he prayed in that garden, and he looked at his closest friends, his disciples, and said, hey, pray with me, do not lose heart. And what did they do? They fell asleep. And Jesus went over and he prayed in another part of the garden to his Father, saying, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. He prayed this 3 times. He's praying about this cup of God's wrath, the justice that actually would be coming our way, which is the ironic part of this whole parable. Because if you and I actually prayed, God, give me justice, that's a terrifying thing that no one would want to pray unless God answered that prayer of Jesus with a no. And that's what happened. He said, there is no other way. There is no other way. The cross is the plan. It is the way for you to go and to die and to bear the weight of the justice that every one of my people deserved. And Jesus goes and he endures that. He goes and endures that for you so that through the cross, you could be adopted into the loving care of God. Not that you would simply know him as a judge, but that you would know him as your loving Father. Guys, if you are in Christ, you are not insignificant to God. You are not. You are not an annoyance to God, right? He's never thinking about you, I really wish they would just go away. I really wish you would just leave me alone. You know, you just keep talking about this thing, you know? Right? I want you to think about this. Think about this. In the Bible, God is said to count 2 different things. Do you know what they are? He's said to have counted the stars, the untold amounts of stars, and he is said to count the number of hairs on your head. And for some of you, that's not that high of a number, right? So you're like, well, that doesn't mean a lot, but still, the point is there. Right, that he can count. He's counted the untold amount of stars. That's how glorious he is. That's how transcendent he is. He's just like, I know them all. I created them all. Those burning suns and galaxies far away in the universe that you will never even see and get to. I've made those things. I know how many there are. And I also know how many hairs are on your head. I know that. He counts the stars with infinite knowledge. And he counts the hairs on the heads of his people with infinite love. With infinite love. That's you, if you know Jesus. The only person, I love this, that Tim Keller says, one of my favorite thoughts. Tim Keller said this. He says, the only person who dares to wake up a king at 3 a.m. and ask them for a glass of water is the king's child. Like, you're not going to wake up a king at 3 a.m. and say, could you get me a glass of water? The only person that can do that is the child of the king. And that is the kind of relationship that you have with God. There's still a final elephant in this room, though. If all that's true, if I want to know this God, well, when will this God answer me? When will he answer? Well, we get this in verse 8. I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? It's important to realize that this parable that Jesus tells is in this wider section of Luke where Jesus is teaching about his second coming, about when he comes again. That he is going to come again and he's going to bring heaven to earth. That's the idea. So I think Luke is saying something like this. Jesus will come back. And he will come back soon. Sooner than you would expect. And when he does, nobody will say to him, you didn't listen. You didn't listen. No one will say to him, you weren't answering my prayers. You will look and you will see how all of your prayers were answered and none of them fell on deaf ears. And you will see how they were answered with divine wisdom and infinite love. He will do what is right by every single one of them. When Jesus returns, your answered prayers will be realized, and in light of eternity, you will go, man, that was fast. That was fast. I love how Peter writes in 2 Peter verse 8 of chapter 3. He says, do not overlook this one fact, beloved, those who are loved by God. Do not overlook this one fact, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as 1 day. The idea is that your version of time and what's actually true of time don't always sync up. But one day they will. And we will go, man, that was fast. This is challenging, I think, for us as we consider things that feel like slowness to us, right? I mean, a few years back, there was a horrible shooting at a clinic in our country. And when that stuff happens, a lot of people feel compelled to post, like on social media, praying for the people involved in the situation. Like we all post how we're praying. And there was a lot of backlash to that. And so this hashtag really became trending. And the hashtag is, God's not fixing this. Basically, pushing back against all the people being like, I'm praying about it. They're like, what's the point of prayer? God's not going to fix this. Their point is that we just need to do something about it. Right? And to be true, there is like a correction that sometimes we have. We go, I'm going to pray about it and then move on with my life. And we are called as God's people to do good, to do what's righteous, to do what is just in this world. That we don't just sit back passively, but God calls us into our communities, right, to do righteous things that honor him. But the point of people pushing back, they're saying, God's not going to do anything about this. And I thought about that because if Jesus were to kind of like push back on those posts, he would maybe point out this story. And he would say something like, no, I will. I'm going to fix this. God is going to fix genocide. God is going to fix cancer. God is going to fix human trafficking. God is going to fix your broken family. When you pray, God knows and he cares far more than you do, not less. Not because he's nagged by us, but because of who he is. He is the God who cannot fail to do what is right. He cannot fail to do what is right. He is a just God. And so when he says he will give justice to them speedily, he's reminding us that God has fixed on the divine calendar a date, and on that date is vindication. Vindication is the next thing on the divine calendar, and when it comes, in light of all of eternity that will follow, it will be a quick exercise of justice. In light of eternity, you will believe it came quickly. You will know that he cared all along. You will know that you are loved. And so Jesus ends with a question for us, because we often ask, will God hear my prayers? Will God answer my prayers? And how does Jesus end this parable? In verse 8, he ends by saying, well, will you pray? Will you pray? Will I find faith? We often go, will God be faithful? And his answer is, of course I will. Will you be faithful? Will you be faithful? Will you keep praying? Will you keep praying? Will you keep trusting in who he is? Are you losing heart right now? Are you losing heart today? Do you feel like throwing in the towel? Do you feel like throwing in the towel? Well, how will you not lose heart? Well, it's by looking at your God and understanding who he is. He hears you. He loves you. And he's coming back to bring justice with him. Let's pray.